So the way of protecting yourself is to start connecting. Connection is protection. When you recognize the highest part and the highest intentions of your everyday life, objects, other people, the toilet, the floor, when you dive deep and aim for the Death Star instead of being distracted by all that is around you and trying to get your attention, when you go straight to the source, that is your ultimate protection. And gratitude, again, is the shortest cut to that.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead.
Today I'm delighted to welcome Kimberly Steele to the show. Kimberly is the author of Sacred Homemaking, a magical approach to a tidier home, and our conversation is about the spirit of the home, really. How we tend our spaces, how we speak to and thank the objects and rooms and beings that support us, and how ordinary acts of cleaning and care and gratitude can become part of a very grounded and powerful magical practice. A quick note before we get started to say thank you to everyone who has sent me little messages about the new book, The Diviner's Path, and thank you to everyone who has purchased it. The feedback really means a lot to me. And if you've read it and enjoyed it, one of the best ways you can support it is by leaving a positive review wherever you purchased it or over on Goodreads. Of course, I'll also be in London later this month after Spain and Italy. I'll be presenting a workshop at Atlantis Bookshop on July 28th. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of you there, and the links to that info will be in the show notes. And now, enjoy the conversation with Kimberly Steele.
It is my pleasure to welcome onto the show someone whose book I have very much enjoyed reading and discussing with some friends of mine already. So, Kimberly, thank you so much for being here on the show, and it's delightful to talk to you.
Thank you.
So we have a traditional first question, which is if you could describe to us what your first experience with divination was. So essentially, was it something that you didn't encounter until you were an adult, or did you have like an aunt or a grandmother that read tea leaves, or
I came from a background of absolutely no occultism. I am still the only one in my family who does anything with that. My first experience with divination was tarot cards. The Crowley deck, I acquired one when I was about maybe 16, 17. And I was actually pretty popular in college for doing readings. I was good at readings, and I still to this day do a little bit of tarot, but I fell into atheism when I was about 19, 20-ish, and then I really did not emerge out of that atheism until I was in my 40s. And at that time, I got into Druidry and into the Druid practices of discursive meditation, the sphere of protection, banishing ritual, and of course, divination. And that method I adopted was Ogham. And I have been reading Ogham ever since, probably approximately 7 years ago, and I do free OM readings. I don't know if you knew about these, but every week pretty much I do free OM readings at my Dreamwidth blog for anybody who asks. And I highly recommend.
that's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners will be very excited to hear that. Uh, so you mentioned that you came from a background where you are still the most witchy person, shall we say, in your family. So from doing tarot readings and being good at it, clearly, when you were in college, through that, what do you think it was that kind of pulled you towards Druidry after that pause? Like what was the call that kind of, you know, pulled you back in, shall we say?
I found that atheism had very few answers for things I was experiencing in my life. even through my atheism, I saw ghosts, usually ghost cats, out of the corner of my eye, and I excused them as transdimensional bleed. I always thought, oh, it has a physical explanation, and it does, I'm sure, but I never thought of it as entirely coming from my own head. And I noticed that atheism just had this blind spot where phenomena of the astral plane, especially, is concerned. Dreams, so-called out-of-body experiences, which aren't, you're still within your body, and I was always fascinated by horror films. I never really lost my fascination for the occult, yet I was also really enchanted or maленchanted by materialism for that time that I was atheist. So that also had a lot to do with why I became atheist.
Yeah. So, and then that kind of recognition of the blind spots of it and the sort of having to explain it using other methodologies, which then it starts to.
Right. I mean, it got to the point where I stopped dismissing ancient knowledge. I feel like I was certainly captured by the progress narrative as much as anyone, where I looked upon ancients as somehow being more primitive or not as smart as modern people. Now I've completely reversed that. I feel that they knew things that we have absolutely no idea how to access. And my book, Sacred Homemaking, is written as occultism for dummies. Okay. It's written to be very much the book I needed coming out of atheism that I did not have. I think a lot of people are emerging out of atheism these days. And John Michael Greer talks about the new religiosity, and I think, didn't he get that from Spengler? Meaning that is a Spenglerian term. It's happening. And we have all of these forces, these egregores that I talk about in the book, of course, astral pyramids, trying to grab at us and to try to, when we are trying to find a something to believe in, we're very subjected to a battery of forces all the time. And I was certainly grabbed at, but I decided I really needed to reconnect with nature. And nature, as I have explained in the book, is the etymology of it is the fact of being born. It's not, we always think, oh, this microphone, that can't be nature. This computer screen, that can't be nature because, man, people made it at some point. No, it's all nature. Okay. It's nature just means origin or birth. The idea that I try to get people to understand in sacred homemaking is that you are surrounded by nature all the time and you were never out of it. And I believe that if you are able to use your powers of discernment better, that is what connects you with nature. It's not like you don't have to be a special person, meaning in your own mind. We're all special in some way, in every sense of the term. But what you have to do is you have to be willing to get to the source, to look at the root. That's why I would suggest that people start thanking their toilet, oddly enough, because we need not to look down on the toilet and say, I'm better than my toilet. I don't have to clean my own poop, and pee. I can just trash this whole bathroom every day and just expect it to be there for me. And instead, I say, no, get to the root. Every single being on this planet, including the toilet, has an intention, has some kind of consciousness. We may not understand that consciousness, but it's there. And in order to understand nature and other consciousness, we have to humble ourselves, not humiliate ourselves, but humble ourselves enough to recognize that those things, like us, want to be appreciated for for the good we do instead of just taken for granted and dismissed when we do something wrong. Everything in this world, even the toilet. And by starting off very small, thanking the toilet, cleaning it night after night, which is a practice that's done in the Orient and in especially in Japan, where they assign a god to the toilet, by thanking the door that keeps you safe at night from people just rolling in, thanking the bed by making it in the morning. I always make my bed, I always sweep my own floor every morning. By doing that, you increase the vibe of everything around you, just all these basic things, all these mundane things. Mundane means before the temple, but it's all the temple.
I think kind of going back to the idea that there are a lot of people coming out of or seeking to somehow expand and change their materialistic viewpoint because there's an awareness that something's wrong with it, even if people are not quite aware why. It's clearly not working the way that it was, packaged and sold to people. And that is that there are strands of ways of knowing that are missing from it. This is where I believe like divination comes in, because it's, kind of just welcoming back in other ways of knowing that are,
Welcoming in the divine.
yeah, welcoming in the divine once again to the conversation. But it's also kind of a dangerous spot, because when people are sort of trying to change worldviews, nature abhors a vacuum. And if people are in that sort of in between state of having to give up certain old beliefs and now having to welcome others in, it can be very confusing and overwhelming for people, which is, I agree with you, like the idea of starting from gratitude, which is where you really begin everything in the book, which I deeply appreciate, helps to make people I don't want to say more protected, but protection does come into it. But it's starting from a more grounded place where you might be less of a target for perhaps other worldviews that might just want to grab onto someone and take control of people's awareness in other ways. So
The
um,
monster I believe we have to fear the most is not a beast who lumbers in a forest or in some ancient castle, but it is a monster that lives inside all of us if we allow it, the Wendigo. I've talked about the Wendigo, which is a creature from Native American legend in many an essay and many of my many of my writings. I have one book I'm working on, and that's called Sacred Beauty, that is like sacred homemaking, but for the personal self. And the Wendigo's opposite. Well, let me first explain what a Wendigo is. A Wendigo is a monster that is pops up in Native American legend, usually in the far north tribes. It's a kind of zombie slash uh I don't let me think. It's sort of a zombie, but it's a cannibal. And what reliably happens in these stories is the one person goes out and becomes an outcast. He tastes human flesh one time and develops this insatiable appetite for it, becoming a supernatural creature who eats and eats as many humans as he can, but the more he eats, the thinner and hungrier he gets. And I feel that this is a great metaphor for exactly what happens to consciousness these days in a reliably common way. We have a lot of people where they're taken by these faiths, such as modern Christianity, which, as I'm sure you can tell, I'm no fan of, where you see somebody like a televangelist preacher living in a giant McMansion, flying around in private jets. And that person is preaching a prosperity gospel where he fleeces the money from poor people poor people who on pensions who cannot afford to give him anything and makes just lies to them, sees it as okay to lie to them to pad his own pockets so he can feed his Wendigo. And that is the kind of religion I see trying to absorb a lot of the people who are floating around looking for something deeper. And they unfortunately get fascinated by these big McMansion televangelists or the Pope sitting on his golden throne, that these people where it's really obvious they have a Wendigo, but since the hungry are looking to be faithful, they don't see it. And what I'm trying to do in my book is anti-Wendigo in all ways, shapes, and forms, because gratitude is the silver bullet that slays the Wendigo in all its forms. When you are absolutely determined to clean up your own messes, and every single thing in your life, from the most simple meal to any relationship you have, when you're grateful for those things, that's powerful magic. And that is what I'm trying to help people kindle within themselves.
It's the kind of it's simple, but that doesn't make it easy in the sense that like the truly simple things are the yeah, on one level they should be the easiest, but sometimes there are so many other forces that can pull us in other directions that it is not necessarily the easiest to apply every day. So that is really beautiful because in this little book you give so many very simple and easy, I'll still use both of those words, practices through which that gratitude can then travel and be made manifest into actual, like physically, what does that mean you do, as opposed to just a thing you think about. Though the thinking is important too, as you put it, like everything starts with an intention, of course.
Yes. Yes, everything starts with an intention. Gratitude as an intention is the fastest shortcut we have to the divine. It is the And I also speak of music as being a shortcut as well. And I talk about it being able to be used for evil, or, evil being a very dicey term to use. But when gratitude is invoked in everyday life, even in the smallest things, even a religious ignoramus such as myself, who came up in casual Christianity and had no occultism anywhere, nobody doing it in my family, absolutely not. Even an even a doofus like me can figure it out. So if I can figure it out, I believe anyone can. I mean, I had difficulty when I was a child studying music because I'm dyslexic. And I have the unfortunate problem of, even to this day, of notes swimming on the page when I try to look at them, not literally, but meaning almost being unable to look at them, unable to focus on them. That's what it ends up being, a lack of focus. And I definitely have some kind of attention deficit that's not diagnosed, and I'm highly functioning autistic. So there's that. What happens that I find with is that with my students who have this, a lot of times have the same problems. I actually have a lot of music students who are learning disabled. You have to take it slow, and you have to start where you are, and just don't get too ambitious. Just like with musical practice, just a little bit at a time, every day, just day after day, dogged determination. The same determination, as I use this analogy many times in the book, of a drop of water that eventually became a river that carved out the Grand Canyon. That that becomes your process, and you don't get too upset if you're not great at it. Don't get upset. It's okay. Everyone's got to start somewhere. Everyone has to, you just have to refine your intention over and over until it becomes a finely honed blade. It doesn't happen in a montage. It doesn't happen in that short of a time. It happens over a very long period of time, and you just keep going at it. And that's sacred homemaking is a way of going at it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have an exercise towards the very beginning of the book, which is the clean one corner exercise.
Yes.
I really appreciate that because I'll ask you to describe it just briefly, but it is that kind of like a way of trying to fight overwhelm, which is the thing I think I would hazard that every single person has the tendency
Oh,
to overwhelm at times. But could you just describe that? Because I think we can go a few directions from there.
sure, absolutely. Modern life is so overwhelming. We are very blessed to have so many fun things and not so fun things to do. I mean, we're very blessed, but just the presence of all these machines, as useful as they are, is very overwhelming. And one of the problems I've had with other tidying methods, such as I just happen to have this book here, The Life Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. The problem with this particular book is that it suggests a all at once clean out that can last up to a month, meaning she insists that at least back in the time she wrote this, she insists that the only way of going about a effective, long-lasting cleaning of your home is to take everything by category, but everything and purge it and then just start over, reset. But life is not a TV show, and it doesn't work that way. A lot of us have to work, right? A lot of us, we're very busy, we're very overwhelmed. And so the clean one corner exercise is a very small inroads. It's like Marie Kondo's book. Marie is the proper pronunciation in Japanese, but it's like Marie Kondo's book, except for it's a tiny, tiny mini corner. Yes, you're cleaning it all, but you're cleaning all of one corner. That's it. And then you're going to try to observe with your spidey sense, what's the vibe after you clean one corner of your home? Have you tried it?
I not since reading the book, but I have done something similar where I have done a version where I set a timer for myself and say that in one room I will do whatever I can in a certain time definition. Like I have 1 hour, which for me has prevented the oh no, I have failed because I have not finished. Whereas with sort of like doing it as a time delineated or space delineated, I feel like then you can simply say, well, I have completed that. I have completed the time, and therefore I can go back to it and yet still feel that there's been success. Do you know what I mean? So it's that sort of like if you've made it small enough, then success is possible. And it doesn't become, oh no, the entire house begin now, or it is
Right.
failing.
And isn't it true with gardening that the second you go out there and you do one task, there's about 50 other ones that start asserting themselves?
They multiply. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And you just have to realize that Mother Nature is always going to be a better gardener than you, and that she doesn't mind you rearranging things, but you just have to stay in your lane at some point. And
Oh,
that's the same way with housework. It's do your best. It's be your own good parent. A good parent isn't going to chastise you for not cleaning your entire room perfectly. A good parent is just going to say, "Good job," and pat you on the head, give you a cookie, and just accept it the way it is. And we need to become our own good parents. I'm going to try to insist on that in Sacred Beauty a whole lot. Meaning, if you didn't have a good parent, I'm lucky. I had wonderful parents. But if you didn't have a good parent, you need to start becoming your own. It's a DIY project you need to adopt for yourself. And a good parent is going to say, excellent effort. A good teacher will reward you and say, excellent effort, even if the piece that you performed was not perfect, or the recital. In that, in the same way, when you are looking at yourself through a similar lens, it is really important to recognize your own effort, even if you didn't do something perfectly. And that I notice even my most gifted music students that sometimes the most gifted ones are the most difficult to work with because they're a bit lazy, because they think they can be. And so don't be that student. Be the good student or the good child who puts in effort. Effort is worth a lot.
Yeah. And that's the same with divination as well, where it's both it there's a culture that expects perfection very, very early on, when really it is the effort of going into it and having something that is a small amount that is digestible that really makes the difference. When you approach it with humility, but also with consistency, that's really what makes the difference. And that is with forms of knowledge as well as, practices that we're doing. That's the same thing.
Absolutely. Divination is something where you have to resensitize yourself to the unseen world. And that can be very difficult when you're inundated with materialism and atheism. And I would argue that modern day, especially monotheist faiths, are so riddled with materialist atheism, it's hard to distinguish them from materialist atheism. And we have, as I say in the book many times, we have been deadened. Our particular era of what I often refer to in essays and books as meat world, meaning physical existence, is one of the hardest to become a spiritual being within ever. We are really going through it. I talked about this in a little bit in essays, but also in a podcast that I did with um called the Plant Cunning Podcast, which you might be
Yeah,
familiar with.
they are friends
Yeah.
of the show, wonderful people, of course. Yeah.
Lucky you. Oh my gosh, I would love to live closer to them. Are you going to their event this year?
Sadly, no, I was a presenter at their event a couple of years, but I can't
Oh,
here. So, but yeah, no, they are wonderful. And shout out to them in this episode, just once again saying to everybody,
AC and Isaac, yes. And I had Isaac do a Vedic reading for me that really I thought was life-changing. Highly recommend it. I had not known anything about Vedic astrology, even though I've got a few books on it. He's very insightful, and I would hands down recommend that. I did that about a month after we did a chat. We were talking about the resensitization, right? And just the fact that, okay, most people are in this state of spiritual leprosy, and we're born into this state. We are born into spiritual leprosy and etheric starvation. And for the layman, spiritual leprosy is, well, leprosy in general is a condition where things are happening to you and damage is being done to your body, but your nervous system is so messed up that you can't feel it. Meaning your arm could be burnt off and you would barely notice. And that's obviously not good that you're losing limbs or so or whatever, but you feel pain, you just don't feel the pain coming from the correct receptors. And that is the exact position a lot of people, and I would say the whopping majority, are born into these days in the depths of the Kali Yuga, the depths of the darkest, most materialistic, dark age of the soul, dense, very close to the demonic realm era that we are in. The demonic age is what I often call it. And we're born into this situation where we're even told that the astral plane is entirely our imagination, that somehow images don't exist, where obviously they do, meaning that, oh, that's not real. Well, reality comes from those images. You can't have you can't have the manifestation of anything without an image or what we perceive as an image, okay? Meaning it's just the step that comes before. But so we're told our whole lives that dreams aren't anything, that they're just kind of these fun little diversions that don't really mean anything. We are told that we don't go anywhere after we die, or that everyone, or even worse, that there's all these presumptions made, like the monotheist who says after a lifetime of really being quite crappy to others, thinks that he's going to go sit at the right hand of God, or the Buddhist who thinks he's achieved nirvana after not doing anything different than the other billions of human beings, not significantly, but so there's this idea that it's not real, but if it is, that you can just win the game by declaring yourself a spiritual being. It's just so messed up. So you end up with a bunch of spiritual lepers who are essentially in, if the astral plane is dodgeball, then these people are in a burlap sack being kicked and they don't know it. They're blind, they're deaf, they're dumb. And then we have etheric starvation. The etheric, as I'm sure you know as an occultist, what that is the energy layer between the physical and the world of images. And I talk about the etheric plane a ton in my essays and in this book. What the etheric is the vibe. All right. So it's electricity. That's the same thing. It's energy. It's the life force that animates us, that makes us move around and have life in our eyes rather than just being dead corpses. It is definitely in our food. It is kind of like a force field that you cannot see, but it's all of those things, and that's why it's hard to understand. Feng shui, the art of placement in the place in the home, that works with it. It works with the flows of how it tends to move around. Uh, but there's so many other ways of working with the etheric plane that books could be written about how many ways there are to work with the etheric plane. Sacred Homemaking is a book that definitely deals with working with the etheric plane from various other planes, from the physical, from the astral, from the spiritual. So that's why we use gratitude to impact it from the top down. And it's bad for me to say top down because it's all right here and right now. The etheric plane is not some place where you can go. It's here. It's now. Same thing with the astral. Even the spiritual is right here, right now. We are just so dense and so not very smart as beings. I mean, we're so, and we're immersed in this terrible part of the Iron Age / Kali Yuga that we have, a lot of us have almost completely lost our spiritual senses at all. And for occultists like you and me who've spent some years getting back into it, it's not hard to understand. But for somebody who is still in that atheist materialistic state that our world puts you into on purpose and tries to keep you in on purpose, it can be a lot. And that's what sacred homemaking is. I'm trying to say, oh, okay, well, clean your toilet and see what happens. Clean one corner and see what happens. Go talk to a tree and then see what happens. And even you can do it.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's especially with social media and the way that so many things are sort of always under being observed, or the act of like having a focus on observation and perfectionism, that can come into this discussion as well. So there's the form of thinking about our homes where not a lot of attention is paid to it, and we sort of have that sort of etheric mess that is also can be, physical mess and that accumulation. But then there can also be in a sort of, on the flip side, an obsessive desire to purge all or have like an Instagram aesthetic look to it. So
Mhm.
how do you think about trying to live in a balanced way between those two? Because I am not a person who does like obsessive amounts of cleaning, but I have met
Right.
some people that when they talk about it, there seems to be also kind of something out of balance with the way that they're approaching it, like you talk about it as like anxiety or fear. So how do you think the two extremes are happening?
I am so glad that you brought that up. There's two extremes, and both of them are equally bad. There's the hoarder's house, which unfortunately I think we all know about, where someone cannot use their toilet or sink because it is clogged with filth. And then there's the perfection Wendigo, which is also a Wendigo, where you've got a person who is clean. They're so obsessed with cleaning that they can't get to sleep at night. They have to have everything in its place, and each shoe has to be lined up by the bed. Your shoes have to be under the bed with the laces tucked in, or you can't sleep. And then there's also a million other things, and everything has to be so perfect. And or the remodeling Wendigo, where unfortunately I've seen this one in other people even recently, thankfully not in my own family that I know of, but where you have a perfectly wonderful house, a absolute palace when you really consider it. Yet the kitchen, they rip out perfectly good kitchens. They work out, they take a stove that functions absolutely fine and they tear it out so that they can put in some $10,000 stove that they barely use. Why? Why? Why tear out something perfectly good? That's a Wendigo. That's never going to be satisfied. Okay, you can tear it out. I yesterday my mom got a Better Homes and Gardens magazine delivered. And oh my gosh, if you want peak Wendigo, this magazine is so off the chain. I have never seen something that screamed demonic obsession more than the current issue of BH&G. I mean, they're into trying to jam every color and every pattern into one room. And of course, these rooms are cavernous, but we're talking like a floral wallpaper, a pink bed that looks like it's from 1983, an exact replica of something that happened in 1983, pattern carpeting, completely different colorway, sort of related, maybe, but not really. Just 18 different styles. Maximalism is what they're trying to do. And what's grotesque is that this person, every single person who was featured in this magazine threw away, tore out a perfectly passable bunch of rooms. They top to bottom they threw it out in order to get this tacky aesthetic that I was joking with my mom. We were having a chuckle that I'm like, all this needs to look like it is it's 1978 is the plastic furniture covers and I can smell the cigarette smoke from here. I'm so glad this magazine does not have smell-o-vision because it looked like an exact replica of 1978 with the velour and the you can smell the reek of cigarette smoke. If you're a certain age, you know what I mean. And that's a Wendigo.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, we're trying to navigate a middle way through the that, which then goes back to the focus on what is close and what is local, which I appreciate that you also talk about a relationship with food. And of course, I live on a farm and do my best with gardening, though I'm nowhere near as good as my neighbors. It's okay. I do my best, as we're talking about. You put your effort in, you get some things from your greenhouse. But I think that emphasis on the local as opposed to what is coming into your inbox, or through a magazine or social media can help to thread that needle. There's also the focus on the local is also in something that you say, which I really liked later in the book. Those that are outraged are not paying attention, which is flipping on its head some usual discussion points of like, oh, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And I was wondering if you could just touch on that, because it is I think a very interesting piece of this.
Outrage is what happens when you are prey to astral pyramids or egregores, forces that have amassed outside you when you are victimized by those forces and recruited into their blob without actually realizing it. Okay? Because any sort of significant change begins with number one. There's only really one thing you can change effectively is yourself. Be the change you want to see in the world. And if you are not that change, you're just acting out someone's little stage play that they made for you. That's all you're doing. If you, for instance, I'm a vegan, right? And there's definitely a lot of negativity associated with that because vegans tend to be the ones I've hung out with, they're very prey to outrage. I mean, they're always, going somewhere and getting mad at someone for eating animals instead of, and they think that just by not eating animals themselves that's enough. No, if you're going to embrace ahimsa, you have to also be kind to human beings too. You can't just be kind to animals and then crap all over human beings. No, your kindness actually has to be deep. It can't be just only for animals and screw humans, because there's a lot of vegans like that where they're just really anti-human. No, you have to live it. You have to let it take, you have to let a good egregore in instead of a bad one. If you're running around trying to trying to put out people's fires, you can have no fire of your own. Just you're trying to get them to do something you're not doing. And you can't do that. You have to just start with small and with number one. That's why the smallest act of sacred homemaking, that's why just something as simple as talking to a tree and being, connecting with the spirit of the land by going outside, sitting with, saying, hi, tree. You don't even have to say this aloud. Just, hey, tree, mentally, can I talk? Can we talk? The tree, if you don't have a bad feeling, the tree says yes. And you sit with your back to a tree for a couple minutes. Even that is far more effective than going to some protest somewhere because you didn't try to change other people's minds by showboating with signs outside a establishment like a store or a school or on the road like I see some people do. Instead of doing that, you started with yourself. You said to yourself, I'm worth working on. And instead of projecting all of my angst onto a sign and showing off, I'm going to just sit and look at myself, connect with a tree who is this living spirit of the land. And I'm going to become more in tune with what's actually going on instead of being distracted by what some bully egregore is telling me is going on.
Yeah. Yes, that also though requires the patience and the difficulty of just sitting with yourself, which can be a very challenging thing, especially in a culture that does not encourage us to sit and be quiet. It is
Yeah.
sometimes the harder work.
Yes. And unfortunately, we have a lot of experts who have no business, it, no business even pretending to know what they're talking about. I specifically cite psychologists and so-called counselors, psychiatrists. In one of my articles, I think unfortunately I did put it behind a paywall because it's rather spicy on Substack, but it's called "The Doctor is Incompetent." Because what it is I think one of your guests, I can't remember if this was one of your guests or one of Isaac's guests, maybe it might have not even been either one, but one of the guests on a podcast had said, look, oh, it was Amelia South. She was on Isaac's podcast. Now I remember. If you're going to a counselor or a psychiatrist year after year, and if you're going for more than, say, 3 years and your problems really haven't changed, why are you going? If you still got the same psychological issues that you did and you just are on more medication, you're going to them? Why? Because they're a drug dealer? That's why you're going? What's getting done there? And that's what I would say to people, beware the expert, because they're often just, again, another victim of an astral pyramid, which is the same thing as an egregore. And what is an egregore? An egregore is what's commonly called a group spirit. So when you think of a a company, for instance, the music studio I work for, that group of people has a team spirit essentially that is its egregore. But a lot of things have egregores, and egregores tend to organize themselves pyramidally. This is just a very common shape in consciousness, is the pyramid. This idea of the original intention being at the quote unquote top, metaphorical top, and distributing itself and wanting to amass as many as it can at the bottom. Meaning, so if an egregore is a family, or if an astral pyramid is a family, you have mommy and daddy at the top. They make children, and those children make grandchildren, and the community around them is also part of the egregore, right? A company can be an astral pyramid, even something that is temporary, like a party, is an astral pyramid. And what's interesting about these shapes is the way they try to attract other shapes from other planes, meaning that they all have their own interesting way of fitting in with each other.
So with that acknowledgement of how we are kind of part of both these larger pyramids, but also the smaller ones that are more temporary, shall we say, like you mentioned, like the party idea. We know that that's not optional. It's not like you could say, "Oh, and I don't like that idea. I just won't take part in any of them." No, no, we don't. We don't get
Don't
to
have a choice.
make, we can choose maybe to uncouple ourselves, or choose not to take part in certain ones, but it's just a part of living in this world. But
It is.
how do you think that then the ideas of protection, because you go into protective um,
Yes.
ideas in the book, what are some of your favorite ways of discussing that with people so that it doesn't turn into just like fear-based paranoia? Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I have seen some people then start verging on everything and everyone is attacking me. I must put up barbed wire, whether
Yeah.
spiritually or physically. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think is a good marker for that balance in this way?
I would quote Frank Herbert from Dune: fear is the mind killer, especially unanalyzed fear. The thing that you need to protect yourself probably the most is unanalyzed fear, because unanalyzed fear it will make your life a living hell. And it can do it by making you into the hoarder that I talked about before, because you're afraid of leaving your house. So you start just amassing junk and clutter, unappreciated clutter. Or you have that perfectionist person who is their fortress is their McMansion, and they think that unsustainable literal walls and gated community, they think that that's protecting them from something. And it's not, because again, they are in the on the plane where it actually matters, the plane of subtle beings. They are a piece of raw meat in a piranha tank. That's what's happening to them on the astral plane. They are fair game for whatever astral pyramid of materialism, whatever Wendigo wants to capture them, and they are just being pulled apart, and they don't know it. So, the way of protecting yourself is to start connecting. Connection is protection. When you recognize the highest part and the highest intentions of your everyday life, objects, other people, the toilet, the floor. When you dive deep and aim for the Death Star instead of being distracted by all that is around you and trying to get your attention, when you go straight to the source, that is your ultimate protection. And gratitude, again, is the shortest cut to that.
So that gratitude and connection, I really like that way of thinking of connection as protection, because it prevents this sort of isolationism instinct, which in a culture that encourages isolation and loneliness anyway, is the sort of way of checking to make sure that we have the right, people and spirits and, balance around us in a way that doesn't isolate us, which is really beautiful. That's also then you use the wheel of the year, you use the seasons as a structure for the book, which is really lovely. And you do, bring up and I think it's kind of threads throughout the book, the idea that this like the temporary nature of a lot of the things in our lives is oftentimes unexamined, speaking of unexamined, and that sort of being comfortable with the fact that our stuff may outlast us, and sometimes it does, and that's wonderful. Things being built to last is an excellent thing. But then there's also the act of allowing things to be temporary, and that includes being aware when there are ancestral spirits or ghosts or hauntings around us to exist. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you think of that temporariness of this and how that plays into, if you want to go into some of this stuff about ancestors or those spirits as well?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the fate of everything in our world, this meat world that we're trapped in, is to become part of a landfill. You, me, everything, my house, the roads, the trees, all the animals, we're all going extinct. And we're not going to be here for really a long time in the scheme of things. And that is why it's so important to appreciate what you've got now and let it go. Because no matter what you do, you could amass grandma's old figurines for 100 years of your life. Let's say you're lucky and you live that long. You could preserve those figurines perfectly. They're still going to end up in a landfill. And the only thing you're going to take with you, because you are an eternal being, okay? But the only thing you're going to take with you, the only thing that lasts, is the skills that you learned the hard way. And one of those skills is gratitude. One of those skills could be playing the violin. It's not going to be violin in your future lives, but you're still going to be very musical. That music, that's not going to die. I used to be a lot more vain, and I mean, I'm still vain, but I used to be a lot more vain. But I've had an epiphany that if I had a choice, okay, which I don't think we have a ton of choice, but if I had a choice of being prettier in this lifetime or losing my musical talent, my ability to sing very well on pitch, I'm definitely the point I would not give up any of my pitch. I think the older me, I would have given up some of it to be prettier, okay, to be more symmetrical or whatever. Now, oh no, I know that that would have been the wrong choice. You will take it with you. All of these all of these sacred things, all of these things where you aimed higher and truer, and you saw the goodness in something that people take for granted all the time. When you look at the intentions of others respectfully and you are grateful for the way you fit in, that is what you take with you. Now, with the phenomenon of ghosts, in the end of the book, at the last season, Winter, I talk about death. In my own case, it's very weird to be someone who was an atheist 10 years ago who talks to dead people very easily. And I know that sounds very woo-woo, but for me, that has always been a talent I've had. And even when I was an atheist, I didn't know who I was talking to, but I am very easily able, I think actually a lot of us are easily able to talk to dead people. The problem is not the voices that we can perceive, it's what we can discern. Because there's a lot of impersonators and mimics who will try to imitate your dead relatives. And a lot of there's a lot of nasty entities who will just pretend to be someone else, like gods, or they'll pretend to be your dead aunt or whatever, or they'll pretend to be W.A. Mozart, and you'll get this whole ecosystem and everything in between. And what can really help is to again acknowledge the possibility, protect yourself through connection to your local environment, but also to discern. Discernment is going to be huge, and that's why I save that chapter for the last part of the book, because if you're going to, it is getting into more of the big leagues.
It's more of the big leagues, and also then that skill of discernment is made more difficult, I think, if the work of the environment that we're living in on a day-to-day basis is not cared for. So if you're living in an area, like you emphasize in the book, like the idea of having clutter or having these unexamined areas of our lives, like physically, but that also then plays into psychologically and spiritually, then that process of discernment is way harder. So it's just, I think that you make the point that it's more likely that you will have some of these, not so friendly entities if the physical day to day of the household, the physical environment is not cared for. Could you maybe talk about like why you like? Can you give an example of like how that would impact, the kinds of spirit contact that you could have in a house? Because I think that also impacts divination, because obviously spirit contact is a form of divination in the sense that it's contact and it's informational
Yeah.
in on one level. So maybe what does that look or feel like, do you think?
Well, let's say you have regular arguments with your spouse because your spouse is a different level of cleanliness than you. And every time you walk in and you feel that etheric disturbance, it pisses you off. What's happening is there are entities, especially in an unprotected house where there's a lot of unappreciated objects and a lot of languishing stuff where it's unrecognized, unloved, essentially. And of course, in the McMansion, there's a lot more to unlove. And you're having these nasty little spats with your husband or your lover, and that is attracting all sorts of things you cannot see that feed off of that energy, that feed off of that on the etheric, it feeds off of it on the astral. And so, what you're pretty much setting up is a remedy for a negative haunting. And a negative haunting is the non physical equivalent of an infection. And it's reliably common. A lot of people are negatively haunted. They just have no idea because, as spiritual lepers, they don't know what's knocking at their door all the time. They don't know what's running around their house. If they can't literally see it, like Harry Potter, if it's not shooting out of someone's fingers, they don't think it's magic. So what tends to happen is this state of unseen sepsis makes you and your home and your children and whoever's in there a sitting duck for whatever wants to get at you. And so what I talk about is that you have to start somewhere to start fighting. And that is why I say with say your relationship, instead of criticizing your mate, instead of that, how about doing something different by looking at something good that they do and focusing on that instead of the million bad things they do. There's always something that they've done right. I refuse to believe that anyone in the world has done nothing right, that there's that person. I'm sure it exists, but I don't know of it. Everyone does something well and does something right. Find that thing, find that spark of goodness and build on it because that lack of goodness is the exact reason why you've got a poltergeist infestation and or your mental life is a living hell because again you're the blind person in a burlap sack on the astral. You have to start somewhere and maybe repairing a relationship or maybe appreciating food is your way in. One of the things that I talk about in the book quite frequently is that we're not appreciating the bounty that we have, especially with food, and that we're trying to do the perfectionistic route, the Instagram route, where you drink a green smoothie that's frankly disgusting, and instead of just appreciating the piece of stale coffee cake as your sustenance, meaning that you have to have the most perfect food, the most perfect recipe, otherwise you feel you cannot be healthy. No, no. There's this phenomenon I talk about in the book called Charlie Brown's Christmas tree that applies not just to food, but to just about everything. Where if you know the old 1960s animation of Charlie Brown's Christmas tree, it's the story of this cartoon boy who is tasked with finding a Christmas tree, and his friend Lucy tells him, no, go get the artificial pink tree that's like enormous. But instead he does her dirty and he comes home with this small, pathetic, but real tree. And at first his friends all criticize him and say, Charlie Brown, you suck, you're terrible, you're totally stupid. But as they put some love and attention and care into the tree, they realize he was right all along and it ends up being the most magical, wonderful Christmas tree transformed by their love. And that is hopefully what people can do with not only their homes, but their lives. You got to start somewhere. And you might not have a beautiful, artificial, pink, sparkly Christmas tree, but you do have something that you can work with. And it is by building this force of goodness instead of focusing on the negative that you protect yourself. And that is hopefully what I convey in this book.
And I think that that emphasis on creativity, on the act of creation as a part of that, because that is the sort of, I don't want to call it a counter because I don't think it's necessarily um, opposed to, but it is the force of creativity, of love, that then infuses the actions and the surroundings with something. Like, we're both musicians, so clearly we're going to go with the importance of music in a house or music in a place. But I think that that artistic creation, that act of creativity, is what then can bring that joy and that Charlie Brownness into a space.
Yes. Yeah, it's really a wonderful special and it almost didn't air, I guess that it was seen as uh too something and the network almost didn't air it, but it ended up being one of the most popular specials of all time, a classic to this day because its message to my mind is extremely important. It is such a powerful message in this age of materialism where we're taking so much for granted and it's cool to dismiss. It's cool to crap on something that you take for granted. the iPhone, okay? It's definitely a pastime among people to say, "Oh, we'd be so much better if it wasn't for the internet, it wasn't for iPhones." I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for the internet. We have to reframe it that the internet, yes, it can be used for terrible things like pornography or it, just doom scrolling. It's a wonderful gift. I love having a free dictionary that also has etymology in my house. This is great. I I mean it's definitely a double-edged sword. Of course, not all the information coming through it is true, but there's a lot of truth that comes through the internet. And if we can task ourselves with finding it, then good for us. But yeah, no thing is so bad that it cannot be worked with very few exceptions.
Yeah.
You've got to work with what you have. You've got to start small. You've got to start somewhere and not and neither go the nihilistic route or the perfectionistic route, as we know in music. And you said you wanted to talk about music. In the book, I talk about music earworms. Okay, so I try to explain the power music has over us via the phenomenon of the earworm, the song that you can't get out of your head, right? And that is magic. It's actually an evil spell that's been cast on you by the creator of the astral pyramid of the earworm, okay? And it's not necessarily the composer themselves, it's usually some shadowy producer behind them who's trying to push an agenda on you. For instance, I remember the McDonald's commercial from the 1970s and also the Oscar Mayer Bologna song, despite being a 20 plus year vegan. So that song has both of those songs have stuck with me, and those were all the intention of some really old and septic egregore to get me to eat more burgers and to be a brat. And I did back then. I did eat McDonald's burgers back then, but obviously that magic no longer works. Now, when we hear these pop songs on the radio, they too have an agenda. And I talk a lot about the it girl agenda on my Substack, usually in the paid side of my Substack, because again, I get really spicy with it. So in the agenda of, say, these pop songs, they are nothing more than advertising jingles. That's all they are. They're just selling an agenda. Usually it's something to do with promiscuity these days. They're trying to get you on birth control. They're trying to get you to divorce. They're trying to do something that's not good for your life. Okay. And if you are immersed enough in that, oh, they're trying to get you to be anorexic. They're definitely trying to get you to do that. If you subscribe too much and get these earworms in your head, you've got some black magic going on. And some people, they fall so under the spell of black magic that they think they have a parasocial relationship with the artist. They really fall in hard, and that those songs take over their lives. Okay. And the best thing we can do to fight those songs is to use other songs, meaning to replace the negative magic with our more positive magic. That's why in my own case, I'm a composer and I write music for the Orphic hymns, which are these ancient poems that were somehow preserved from ancient Greece about the gods and goddesses that are prayers. They're just prayers that I think were probably set to music back in the day, but I set to my own music as a way of also remembering them, because music can really be powerful as a mnemonic device, right? I mean, because we remember those jingles. My baloney has a first name. We remember those because it had a song attached to it. It would have been harder to remember without the song. Well, two can play at that game. I can put a prayer to music and I can defeat your earworm with my earworm. And that's what I try to do with the Orphic hymns. I'm like, well, you're going to try to to do that dark magic on me with your stupid K-pop, and you're going to try to enchant me with that garbage to be a materialist atheist. Well, I'm going to one up you with a musical prayer set to a catchy tune.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so you're watching me wage a war. And
Sound is very powerful, and it is one that it's a power that people tend to neglect, but at our peril, that is for sure. Not to mention how just generally noisy the world around us,
oh,
in a way that is very unusual in the long stream of history. Yeah, that's one. I'm sure both you and I could
yes.
go off on that, but
Yep, we could. Yeah, the person in the forest preserve with the headphones on blasting music. I'm like, the whole reason I'm here is to get away from the constant noise. What are you doing with Ariana Grande in your earphones when you could be listening to the birds? You could be connecting to the spirit of the land, but there you are with your sunglasses, your helmet, you're riding your bike as fast as you can with headphones on. I'm like, that is a recipe to flip over a log and break your back. It,
yes,
it is. And unfortunately, that is a karma that might be somewhat merited, okay? I don't wish that on anybody, but I mean, of course, if you're not paying attention to the spirit of the land, it's not going to be happy with you.
no, no,
It's not going to reciprocate. We must reconnect with the spirit of the land, even if that's in our own house. That counts. And yeah, so yeah, the idea of connection as protection, absolutely. I don't like to see how distracted people are, especially with this noisy world. And yeah, hopefully the music chapter will get through to someone to study music, because even playing your own preferred music, even if you even by playing your own preferred earworms over someone else's, that can even be helpful.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It all makes a difference. Lots of different forms. So before we wrap up, I always like to leave space for one last question, which is there a practice or just a piece of advice that you want to leave people with? I've sometimes found that in my own life, there's a thing that I find I keep talking about, or that just has been occurring to me a lot at a given period. It could be related to what we're talking about here. It could be totally unrelated. But is there something that you want to leave people with before we, talk about what you're doing next? But
Sure. That is the clean toilet challenge. Clean your toilet every night. You don't have to go to town on it. I mean, just keep it relatively clean. And you can say a little rhyme. Nor, what is the rhyme I say? I say, toilet, toilet, handling waste. Thank you for your saving grace. Or not. You just clean it every night and tell me if your finances get better, because mine did. I believe that the same thing is true of a lot of things, but the toilet especially seems to be directly connected with personal finance. It's like the gods see us cleaning that nasty thing and they say, well, she's humble. Soichiro Honda, Honda Motors, okay, that guy, no longer with us, of course, but he started his company out of a shack. He believed in cleaning his toilet every day, and he believed it brought him prosperity. And I would say in his case, he proved it as well as you can possibly prove it. That that cleaning your toilet brings results. So my suggestion to everyone here is we all use toilet, I hope. I hope you're not using a hole in the ground. And well, even if you are, but clean that and every day and for a year. And then tell me if your finances aren't better, or if your attitude towards money isn't better.
yeah, yeah, it's a very, very interesting one. I am going to try that. So I will tell you right now. I will let you know a year from now. So
All you have to lose is a grotty toilet.
yeah, yeah. No, and I love ending with that piece of very practical advice, because I think that's where we start from. We have to go there. shall we say. So what are you already mentioned that you're working on another book? Yay. And you mentioned that you have a Substack. Can you just like tell people where to find you and what they'll find there and things like
Oh, thank you. Yes, the book I'm working on is called Sacred Beauty, and it is going to be about true beauty, not just physical beauty. It's about the appreciation of what is truly beautiful while seeing through the illusion of what is presented as beautiful. It's the book that I needed at age 13 that wasn't there. I needed this book so badly as a 13-year-old, and I hope that if it saves one 13-year-old from an eating disorder, or if it helps one person anywhere to connect with spirit rather than being distracted by various evil magic, then I've it's done its job. So that's a book I'm writing right now. My Substack is just where I post essays every week. I do alternate weeks between my paid, like my paywall spicy essays and my regular essays, but you can find a ton of free essays there. There's a ton of free essays as well as my own readings at kimberlysteele.dreamwidth.org. In that link, I'm sure will be in the show notes. So I'll leave you to the job of that. But
yes,
I hope people seek me out. Yeah, please do. I would love that.
that is wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It'll be
Thank
lovely to
you.
have you back on when your next book is out, and I'm sure that'll be another great conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare guide me back to my bed. The river is frozen, the pollen pads bare. Don't wait for me, darling, there's thorns in my